This BizNews Briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move from business as usual to Investec Business Banking.
It's Tuesday, the 10th of December, and this is your BizNews Briefing. In tonight's show, Gary Player on Donald Trump, Alphabet's quantum computer chip, China's probe into Nvidia's alleged anti-competitive behavior, and more on the Syrian uprising. In tonight's top story, I caught up with Gary Player at the close of the $1 Million Golf Challenge at Sun City this weekend, just before he jetted off to play golf with one of his best friends, Donald Trump.
One of the difficulties in America in the last while has been, if you say you're a Trump fan, which I am, people become very argumentative and almost nasty, whereas I was not a Kamala Harris fan at all with her policies, her woke policies. But if they told me about her, I listened with great interest, but also with respect. And that's the opinion. And this is something that people have got to do, is to learn to understand somebody else's opinion, because you might learn something that you didn't know.
Talk to me about Trump and what kind of man he is. You've spent time with him on the golf course.
Well, I've known him for over 30 years, and I play golf with him almost every month. In fact, I'm going to America tonight, and I'll be playing with him next week again. Actually, I found him an incredibly wonderful man. You know, the stuff I read about him, it's demoralizing. You know, I've come to the conclusion I do not believe anything I read. Well, you look on your phone. One week somebody says I'm dead. The next week they say Johann Rupert is dead. I mean, the stuff that's AI is going to be a great advantage, but a great disadvantage, the stuff that can be said and done. Today on my phone, they got Donald Trump and Elon Musk marrying each other and having a baby. I mean, I don't know how sick you can get, but be that as it may. Now, I'm around Donald Trump a lot. First of all, he's going to change the world for the better. He's going to get rid of all this woke stuff. You know, in America, they have young boys cutting their testicles out at the age of 10 years of age without parental consent. He's going to stop that. He's going to stop all these people that come to America and pull down the American flag and then put up the Hamas flag and then burn the American flag and say death to America. He said, Gary, I'm kicking them all out. President Eisenhower kicked out over 1 million people. Can you imagine somebody in South Africa coming and pulling our beautiful flag down and putting up a Hamas flag and burning our flag and saying death to South Africa? In most countries you do that, they'd shoot you on the spot. Iran, you'd be shot immediately. You know, once you lose lack of law and order, you're in big trouble. And the thing that Donald Trump will bring back is law and order. He's not a diplomat. He says, I don't profess to be, but neither was Winston Churchill the greatest leader ever. But his principle, good education, good manners, you know, standing up, building a strong army, having discipline in school, stopping these universities with a socialist, almost anti-communist rule. Now, if you're a communist, that's your choice. I don't want to live under communism. I travel and I go to communist countries. I want to have freedom. You know, the wonderful thing I can say on your show now that I don't like President Ramaphosa, or I do like him, and I don't go to jail. But you do that in their countries, you might not ever see you again. So we got to realize how much freedom, what freedom means, and the way these American soldiers against in the time of Hitler, how they fought at Normandy, and people like my brother and others in South Africa and Australia and Britain, how we fought against the rule of Nazism and communism so that we could have freedom in our lives. Freedom is a very, very special gift. If you don't have freedom, I tell you what, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think it's worthwhile living. And this
Gary,
man,
do you count President Trump, President-elect Trump, as one of your best friends?
I would say he's a very good friend of mine. And I think that if he can, and when he first became president, he said to me, you know, Gary, I don't believe in wars. He says, there will be no war under my administration. I said, Mr. President, that's not possible. Every president, there's been a war. There was no war during his reign. If he can get rid of and stop the war in Ukraine and stop the war in the Middle East, he will go down as the greatest president America has ever had. I mean, you know, it's just so sad when you think, when you've got a family like I've got, and I've got a school with 130 young black children that go to school, thinking of that children being bombed and killed, those beautiful little black children. I mean, you know, it's barbaric. And so for him to say, I want to have no wars and stop all this woke system, and coming to my country and saying death to America. But there's certain people who criticize him for that. Well, there again, it's their opinion.
How is he a good golfer?
He is not a good golfer. He's an outstanding golfer. There's no president in the history of the world that could ever come even close to him. And he's got golf courses as part of his business. And so he's a great believer in employment. And the way, now here's the thing, I'm sitting, I mean, I've read a few editorials in our papers about him. And I say, well, I wonder if this man has ever met him. How do you form an opinion, a genuine opinion, an honest opinion, if you don't know the man? Simply by what you read? Can you believe anything you read in the world today? Nothing. So now I'm sitting there at the table with him at breakfast. He calls the lady over and says, Mary Lou, you've done a great job for my members here. Come and, African black woman, come and see me at the end of the month. I'm going to take care of you. I go outside. He brings the greenkeeper up to me. And he says, I want you to meet my greenkeeper who's doing such a great job. Children. Now, if a man loves children, you know he's a good man. The kids come to the course there. He says, sit down at my table. He signs a hat for them. He gives them all a presidential pen. He goes into the unions and he meets the guys and talks to them. I mean, you know, you've got to have compassion. You've got to have a personality. You know, there's no substitute for personal contact. And I just think he's fantastic. He's got a chance. He's got a chance to go down as the greatest president. It's a massive, massive undertaking. But if he can do that, and to stop all this crazy woke system, things that are happening to children that you and I never ever thought, pornography taught at school, and that kind of universities with their woke system. You know, I can't go because I'm a middle of the road man, but on the conservative side. If I'm asked to go, which I have been asked to go to many universities in the world, I wouldn't go to a university and talk. In America, even Mrs. Clinton, who's an ultra liberal, the other day, I think it was at Columbia, I stand for correction, at Columbia University, she couldn't finish her talk. She had to get out of there with security. Unless you agree with their socialistic and their communistic ideas, they don't want to let you talk. They talk about freedom. They want you to come and talk. But when you stand up and talk, if it's not what they like, they turn your car over and they stop you talking. That's all going to stop. He's going to bring sanity to the world. Sanity.
It's a controversial interview, and you can catch the full interview at 8 o'clock tonight on BizNews TV. We talk not only Trump, but golf, lifestyle, and longevity. At 89 years old, Gary Player is determined to live to 100, and he's well on track to do that. In today's big technology story, Alphabet's quantum computer chip takes just 5 minutes to solve a problem that a supercomputer would take 10 septillion years. Now that is 1 and 25 zeros to solve. Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde caught up with Google quantum AI founder Hartmut Neven. Let's get the latest.
The biggest challenge thus far has been ultimately error correction. Can you just talk us through what you have just achieved?
Yeah, the biggest news for today is that we developed a new, very high quality quantum chip. And this enabled 2 breakthrough computations. And one is an error correction, where we showed for the first time that as we use more qubits, the error rate comes down, and it comes down exponentially. The second important achievement, breakthrough achievement, is that we did a benchmark computation. Took just 5 minutes on our new chip that would take the top supercomputer 10 septillion years to perform. So 10 septillion, audience may not know, that's a 1 with 25 zeros. So it's a mind-bogglingly long time.
And it took 5 minutes. What I want to understand is what this benchmark test is, benchmark random circuit sampling. What does this prove?
Yeah, so this benchmark problem, we often say, is not a problem that people on Main Street have yet. But it's a suitable benchmark to compare different quantum processors to each other, or to compare quantum processors, quantum chips, against classical computers.
What's so mind-boggling about quantum more generally is that we have been talking about it for decades, but it always feels another 5, another 10 years off. Is it different this time, Hartmut?
Yeah, quantum computing is definitely not that field. There is steady progress, and our new chip that we just released, Willow, will form the basis to start doing useful computations that will enable or solve problems that humankind has.
Let's talk about those problems then. Everyone immediately goes to healthcare, drug discovery. Is that the most obvious place with which this sort of computing is going to be helpful?
Yeah, so the well-understood killer application of quantum computers is to model systems where quantum effects are important. And that is more often the case than you may think. For example, if you want to understand how drugs, pharmaceuticals, bind to cells, or if you want to design a nuclear fusion reactor, or something as mundane as improving the batteries for an electric car, all these engineering challenges involve quantum problems. And their quantum processors are just the tool of choice to solve those problems.
Put it in the perspective of generative AI, the hype that our audience that we have had over the past couple of years. What does quantum mean for that? Is it superior even in its effects versus generative AI? And does it suffer the same issues in terms of energy and infrastructure?
I wouldn't compare it in those terms. AI as well as quantum computing will be the most transformative technologies of our time. But there's a lot of cross-fertilization between AI and quantum computing. So AI can help work for quantum chips to work better, and vice versa. There are many key computational tasks in AI where a quantum chip will just be the tool of choice to handle those.
Staying with technology, as Trump looks to decouple the US from China, Chinese authorities are now probing US chipmaker Nvidia for alleged anti-competitive behavior. Bloomberg's Peter Olstrom has the lowdown.
Just go into the intricacies of this particular investigation regarding a deal made years ago.
Yeah, this was a bit of a surprise. We got this news last night from state television in China, where CCTV disclosed that the agency SAMR has opened this probe into Nvidia and what it calls potentially anti-monopolistic behavior. It's a little curious because, as you say, they're focused in, or they mentioned specifically, a deal that they did 4 years ago to buy a company called Mellanox. It's a company in Israel that makes networking equipment. China had to approve that deal when Nvidia decided to do it, and they did approve it, as you mentioned, in 2020, but they did with 7 different conditions about Nvidia's behavior going forward. That included giving customers in China access to product information from Mellanox and product access for Nvidia's own chips. Now, it's not exactly clear what they're going to dig into in this case, but as you noted, Nvidia has been this company at the heart of the U.S.-China conflicts over technology. Washington has cut off Nvidia's ability to sell its most advanced chips into China, so they're really at the heart of this conflict between the 2 biggest economies in the world.
Now, it's worth noting that the U.S. Justice Department itself is looking for information to Nvidia and potentially violating antitrust laws. It's not the only country investigating Nvidia, but set the context of what other companies are being focused in on this tit for tat, because Micron, for example, is having difficulty with its relationship with China. This just does seem to be around the context of China trying to be one up on what it and respond to the US limitations of technology into its country.
Yeah, as you say, the anti-monopoly concerns around Nvidia are quite broad. It's not just China, it's also the United States. France here has taken a look at it. That's because they have essentially a monopoly, 100% share, almost 100% share in the most advanced chips to train AI models. But you're exactly right. Also, there's this broader trade conflict that we've seen that creates all sorts of problems for companies in between the US and China. Nvidia still sells a lot of chips into China. It had sold more in the past, but 2 years ago we got this news that Washington was going to cut off their ability to sell the most high-end AI chips used to train AI models. Those restrictions have been steadily tightened since then, so Nvidia has suffered because of that. But it's beyond that, too. It's the chip equipment makers that have been restrained. ASML here in Europe has been restrained from selling their most advanced gear. So in response, Beijing has taken a number of actions now. We're seeing them retaliate in certain kinds of ways where they cut off a couple of minerals that are very important to the chip industry and the defense industry, in particular, gallium and germanium. So they're beginning to show that they also have some cards to play, some levers to pull in this broader trade conflict.
On the geopolitical front, Mohammed al-Bashir has been asked to form a transition government in Syria. We caught up with Bloomberg's Stuart Livingston Wallace, who brings us the lowdown on the situation.
The process of forming a government has begun. What do we know about Mohammed al-Bashir?
Yeah, good morning, Jaman. So he was the guy that was basically running the government up in Idlib province, so that was sort of that breakaway area. And they do have a little bit of form in terms of running sort of basic services for people, so they're not coming entirely out of nowhere. What's entirely unclear at this stage, and hopefully we'll get clarity over the next few days, is what exactly is that process? Who is going to sit down with who, when, what are they going to talk about, and what exactly is on the table? And I think if you look at the reaction from certainly the international community, including the UN Security Council yesterday, I think there's a great deal of nervousness out there about what this might look like, what this process might look like, because remember, there are so many competing influences and people jostling for power within the country, not just internally, of course, but externally, with all the neighbours basically either taking territorial gains to cement their positions or making very loud diplomatic noises.
Yeah. Stuart, there was a little bit of chats yesterday. I think many in the Western media have started to question whether governments in the U.S. and in the West could actually move to remove the terrorist organization designation that they have for HTS. What is the likelihood that we see that happening, do you think?
I think very unlikely in the short term, just because you can't spend several years saying something or someone is a terrorist or terrorist organization and then in the space of 24 hours change your mind. I think if there's enough evidence built up over enough time, and certainly the rhetoric coming from HTS's leadership has been reasonably positive, but if that actually transpires into reality on the ground and minorities are protected, rights are protected, then, you know, I think that's an ongoing discussion that will have to be had. But if fundamentally you end up with this group or something resembling this group in charge of the government, at some stage the international community is going to have to decide whether it's going to continue to basically brand it as a pariah or not.
JP Morgan's Stephanie Aliaga discusses how the Syrian uprising could impact the markets. She also looks at how high the S&P 500 can go and also looks to the impact that artificial intelligence could have on the markets. Let's take a look.
You know, I'm sure that you, like all of us, were following every development in Syria over the weekend. It was an incredible story, especially the pace with which it unfolded. But it doesn't really seem to be having that much of a fallout on markets. We didn't see much of a fallout in the Israeli war or in the Ukraine-Russian war. Why don't these geopolitical events have more of a dampening effect on the run-up in the S&P, for example?
It's such an important question. And these events, I mean, not to minimize the horrible human toll that many of them have. For investors, you really want to focus on what the potential impact is for your portfolio. And we've looked at this. We pulled back all of the major geopolitical events since the early 1970s. So start with like the OPEC oil embargo during the Israeli-Arab war. If you average those 14 geopolitical events, some have been a complete surprise, right? The average drawdown that they created in the S&P 500 was just 5.6%. And it only took 13 trading days on average to recover. And when we think about where we are today, markets are looking at these events and they're thinking about what is the sensitivity to earnings, right? A lot of that is through the channel of oil prices. Well, now the U.S. is a major oil exporter, right? We're now the biggest oil producer. And so our sensitivity to that is also more diminished. And so geopolitics, look, there's always that risk. There's all sorts of potential black swan risk. Geopolitics potentially one of them. But we don't want to overemphasize that or over-cater to that in portfolios either.
I mean, it doesn't even seem like this year we've had the collapse of the German and French governments, and it hasn't really affected the rates market in Europe. In terms of this rally, I think we got a new call, another bullish call today from John Stoltzfus. He now expects 7,100 on the S&P 500. He's the biggest bull out there, but everybody is all bulled up, and U.S. households are at their highest allocation of stocks since the 50s. Institutions are holding the most stocks that they've ever held. The same is true of international holders. Who's out there to power any further run higher?
Yeah, well, I mean, there is still signs that there's still like a decent amount of cash on the sidelines, and I think that that will gradually be deployed. This year, we still had a lot of uncertainty overhangs, particularly on elections and and I think lower interest rates do help somewhat with moving and mobilizing some of that cash. I think that can help. We share some of that constructive optimism. We do think that next year is going to add another year to this economic expansion. We're not necessarily looking for the same degree of performance in equity markets on a top-line level as what we've seen in the last 2 years, just because expectations are that much more elevated, particularly for the mega-cap tech companies. But with that said, we are very excited as active managers underneath the hood for the broadening out in opportunities that we're seeing in ways that we can take some risk off the table, put it into other areas of the markets that now have new tailwinds behind them.
Is it not, though, all driven by the AI? I mean, Bloomberg has estimated it's going to cost $1 trillion to build out the infrastructure. I think Moody's said $2 trillion in 5 years on capital expenditures. It just seems like a massive amount of money that investors could cash in on.
The AI theme very much intact and very likely to continue to power the markets next year. But the thing that's changing are the beneficiaries of the AI theme. It's not only going to be that one beloved semiconductor company, right? It's going to be the broader set of beneficiaries that are helping all of that infrastructure CapEx cycle to really come to fruition. Companies that are producing power, electrical equipment, data centers, all of the nuts and bolts that really make that happen. And that's where we're really excited to take risk.
And the South African market is starting to quieten down as we move further into the silly season. Just having a quick look at the market and where we ended today, we had a relatively subdued day on the local front. The market just tracking slightly lower, resources 0.2% to the negative, industrial softer, financials 0.25% down, and the top 40 index losing just almost 0.5%. On the currency front, again, as Tuesday the 10th of December, we've got Bitcoin, $97,000. We've got the dollar rand at 18.81 and pound rand at 22.79. As I said, we didn't see much news on the local front today, but on the up and down side on the market, we had Alphaman adding over 8%, Tungela up over 4%, Tiger Brands to the positive, and then South 32 down more than 3%, African Rainbow Minerals losing close to 3%, and We Buy Cars giving up some of that recent rally that we've seen down 2.5%. Well, that brings us to the end of tonight's BizNews Briefing. We'll be back same time tomorrow at 6 o'clock. You can catch that full interview with golf legend Gary Player at 8 o'clock tonight on BizNews TV. We chat about golf, we chat about Trump, lifestyle and longevity. As I said, Gary Player at 89 years is determined to make it to 100, and he's going strong.
This BizNews Briefing is brought to you by Investec Business Banking. Make the move to private banking service now for your business.